No signal here. No help coming. Just bodies. He was laughing yesterday. Now he's part of the collection. The village remembered. Start praying. Fear whipped at their heels, driving them into a frantic sprint across the creaking floorboards. The village felt wrong, cursed. Breaking into that storehouse had been a fatal mistake. Desperate for cover, they scrambled toward a flickering light and burst through the door. They expected sanctuary, but stepped into an abattoir. A survivor crawled across the wood, dragging his own entrails behind him. Silence choked the room. There was only the heavy copper stench of blood and piles of fresh meat. 3 days before the nightmare began, the world was gray. The bus carved through the mountain rain, carrying Class 2C to their agricultural prison. Kento stared at his phone. No bars, no escape. Inside, the social dynamics were already rotting. Minamo wrote off the boys as hopeless, while Satsuki turned a sickly green, fighting the urge to vomit. Shunya just laughed, asking if the sick kid was ready to quit. Satsuki choked out a denial. Their teacher, Takatori, barely woke up to tell them to eat. But the driver was flying blind, apologizing for the fog as he aimed the heavy vehicle for the gaping mouth of a tunnel. The whining started immediately. No signal? A village of old people? A true tragedy for the modern teen. Minamo told them to shut up, but Chairman Osakabe loved it. He stood up in his tracksuit, demanding a group photo to commemorate the start of their hell. They huddled together, grinning like idiots. Peace signs up, teeth showing. A perfect portrait of lambs before the slaughter. Then, the atmosphere shifted. Outside the window, a shrine sat alone in the mist. A doll watched them pass, but looked closer. Something else was lurking in the shadows. The bus didn't stop, speeding blindly into the curve. The bus spat them out into the middle of nowhere, Koujin Village. The driver gave a lazy wave, promising to return in 4 days. That is 96 hours without escape. The herd moved out, dragging their luggage up the dirt paths and complaining about the silence. Minamo checked the guide. Their keeper was a farmer named Hasakura, and there it was, the holding pen. Kento gawked at the size of the place, but the house was dead silent. No greeting, no heartbeat. They decided to force the issue, sliding the door open. Ambush! A party popper exploded in their faces. A girl named Yoigo emerged from the smoke, screaming a cheerful welcome. But the festivities were short-lived. She looked up just in time to see her own trap fail. The banner came crashing down, burying her in paper and shame. Kento asked if she survived the impact. She sat in the wreckage of her $25 masterpiece, laughing off the pain. The class stared at the single homestay girl, harmless or just incompetent. Yoiko played the perfect hostess, guiding the fresh meat past the entryway in the kitchen. She gave the girls the sanctuary of her own bedroom. But Shunya was not listening. He was too busy staring at her, oblivious to the danger, wondering if she was single. The men were exiled to the altar room, a grim chamber heavy with the scent of incense. And they were not alone. Dozens of porcelain dolls glared back, their painted eyes hungry for a soul. Kento sensed a heavy presence in the shadows. Yoiko was busy chattering about the local curse, ancient dolls from a forgotten time. They walked down the creaking wooden throat of the hallway, oblivious to the darkness closing in. Then the monster revealed itself, a simple bug. Kento shrieked, grabbing Shunya and using him as a human shield. Minamo joined the choir of cowards. Yoiko just sighed, promising the little beast would not bite. Satsuki did not scream. He snatched the intruder off the floor with his bare hands. He glared at the group, disgusted by their fragility. Naturally, Minamo swooned at his ruthless pest control skills. The pack smelled blood. They cornered her, demanding she confess her love to the rich kid right then and there. Peer pressure is its own kind of horror. Kento watched them, feeling the hollow ache of isolation. Everyone else had a goal, a desire. He was just drifting through the void. He looked out into the garden, searching for a purpose, but he found something else. His blood ran cold. Yoiko's face twisted into a mask of pure dread. She did not ask, she commanded. "You should never go there. Never." She pointed toward the old storehouse. Infested with snakes, she claimed. A convenient excuse to keep prying eyes away from the rot inside. Before Kento could push, voices echoed from the entrance. Her parents had arrived. They smiled, welcoming the fresh meat for a 4-day stay. They stepped into the trap, thanking their hosts, while the rich kid ogled the mother. Asako played the perfect housewife, banishing them to the living room to wait. They walked deeper into the belly of the beast, the house settling into the heavy night. Dinner was a farce. The father joked about marriage, while Yoiko poured his beer with a forced smile. Outside, the darkness swallowed the fields. Inside, Osakabe gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned white. He spotted a shadow lurking near the tree line, questioning the figure's sanity. He rolled down the window, finding only the delinquent teacher Takatori. Takatori leaned against the stolen car, claiming he needed to check the escape route. But he really just wanted to smoke. He told the chairman to guard the flock. Osakabe begged him to call if things went south, but the signal was already dead. Casual wave. A final farewell. He drove into the black throat of the mountain road, leaving the village behind, watched only by the silent stone gods. Just. No. Gods. Dad's gods. Dad's god upwards. Fight to. Dad's god to. What to my. Man for knee and saying, your choke, in tal, your jother god. Think at Maja god. In dilly. High in the trees, a cracked porcelain face stared down. A kimono-clad nightmare. Takatori felt the gaze burning the back of his neck, snapping his eyes to the mirror. Logic fought fear. He convinced himself it was just a discarded doll, but the dread lingered. As the tunnel opened its maw, Takatori forced his car forward, driving straight into the mountain's gaping throat. He tried to ignore the silhouette waiting by the shack, a silent watcher marking his entry into the dark. Miles away from the dread, the girls wasted breath on schoolyard politics and popular boys. They hid their giggles behind soft hands. They teased Mai, blissfully ignorant of the shadows lengthening outside. Yoiko soaked it all in. Silence had been her only companion for far too long. Now, she finally had a circle to call her own. They tried to seal the pact with emails, but Yoiko had no phone to offer. She stared at the device, mesmerized by the glowing screen like it was a holy relic. So they used ink instead, scribbling down a lifeline on paper before life could drift them apart. Yoiko's vow echoed in her skull. She would never escape this cursed village. But reality was far less poetic. The room shook with the rhythmic thunder of snoring. Satsuki lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Kento saw the dark hollows carved beneath her gaze. Sleep was a distant memory. The bus ride had dredged up a nightmare that clung to her like a second skin. He pressed for details, knowing her intuition never missed a beat. She whispered the location. The Ningyou Pass Tunnel. Kento froze. That was the exact route they had just traveled. In the vision, the lights died. She was drowning in ink-black darkness. A wet slapping sound echoed through the void. She stumbled back, thinking her foot had caught on a rock. She looked down. It wasn't a rock, it was a severed limb. And from the shadows, the source emerged. A twisted neck, dead eyes, drenched in fresh blood. Kento scoffed, forcing a laugh. He called it a bad joke, a hallucination born of fatigue. People don't just get devoured in modern Japan. It's impossible. But her silence suffocated his laughter. The air grew heavy as he asked the real question. Who was the meat? The silence didn't just break, it shattered. The storehouse shuddered, rattling the mannequins like loose bones in a coffin. Confusion instantly curdled into primal terror. Osakabe screamed for everyone to get under the desks, but a desperate cry cut him off, warning that the furniture was nothing but a death trap. In the dorms, the floor heaved like a living thing. Four eyes clawed blindly at the tatami, stripped of her sight exactly when she needed it most. Chaos erupted, but the bookworm just gripped his novel. He ignored the violent shaking, unaware this wasn't an earthquake, it was the prologue to their end. Miles away, a sedan disappeared into the maw of a mountain tunnel. Deep in the dark, the earth began to growl. The ceiling gave way. Massive boulders rained down, crushing the car's metal frame like a cheap soda can. Dust settled over the wreckage. A single arm protruded from the rubble, a shattered watch freezing time forever. Darkness claimed them all. Media vultures swarmed the entrance. 35 students and staff, buried alive. Fog strangled the mountain. Rescue choppers stayed grounded, leaving nothing but the sealed maw of Ningyou Pass, a perfect tomb. The silence didn't just break, it shattered. A dry, rhythmic clattering seized the boys' lungs. It wasn't the wind, it was the dolls, a row of porcelain abominations, vibrating with a life they had no right to possess. The shelf convulsed. Kento spun around just as a head snapped off its neck. It rolled across the rotting wood with a hollow thud. Dead glass eyes seemed to lock onto their very souls. The entire room shuddered, groaning under the crushing weight of an invisible presence. Then, just as the lights flickered, the chaos died. Kento scanned the room, checking for spilled blood or missing limbs. They were intact, though the blonde coward was practically trying to burrow into his friend's ribcage. The sliding door rattled open. A quick glance confirmed the girl was safe, before they flicked the switch to scour the yard. Kento froze. Shuzu was lurking in the shadows, clutching a heavy canister like a weapon. The old man moved with grim purpose, marching straight toward the isolated storehouse. Kento went rigid as Yoiko's warning screamed in his mind. Don't go in there. Ever. Morning light filtered through the cracks, but the air felt heavy. The house settled with a groan, ignoring the false peace outside. Kento dragged himself into the main room, only to be met with Yoiko's sharp tongue. She snapped at him, clinging to routine like a lifeline. Then came the lie. Shuzu sat there, claiming he had slept through the earth-shattering tremor. The adults shared a hollow laugh, brushing it off. But Kento's blood ran cold. Some shit. He knew better. He had seen the old man creeping toward the storehouse in the dead of night. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. They looked like porcelain masks, hiding a rotting secret. The boy creeps through the undergrowth, every snapped twig echoing like a thunderclap in the silence. The storehouse looms above, a rotting monument to the village's decay. The entry is shattered, the sliding door wrenched violently off its track. Inside, the air hangs thick with the sour, cloying stench of spilled alcohol. He grips his own wrist, forcing his trembling fingers to still. Sudden scrape behind him sends ice through his veins. Deep in the shadows, a sealed cabinet waits, bound in rusted iron and dust. Driven by a fatal curiosity, he pries at the corroded handles.
Prise it.
The wood screams in protest, and the entire structure collapses in a violent, dusty heap. Something rolls out from the wreckage. Long black hair, tangled around a lifeless shape. His breath hitches. A corpse? Here in the family shed? Desperate for the truth, he tears down the hanging curtain. It is not a corpse. It is a girl, doll-like and pale, staring into the void. The boy's terror instantly melts into a pathetic teenage flush. She is breathing. He exhales, thanking whatever God is listening. He stammers out a question. Why is she here? She offers only a silent shake of her head. Does she even know who she is? A single, empty nod confirms she remembers nothing. But his eyes catch a dark stain blooming across the patterned silk. He turns to find her clean clothes, trying to ignore the eerie, heavy silence. Until the metallic smell hits him. Fresh blood. Panic claws its way back in. Hina trembles violently, her body recalling pain Kento cannot imagine. He watches her, realizing the true monsters are the humans running this house. But the answer comes knocking. A voice dripping with false politeness slides through the paper walls. Shuzu. The old hound stands at the window. Kento grabs her. They need a miracle, and they need it fast. Sits. They scramble into a rotting storage shed, diving into the dust just as the heavy wooden door groans open. Shuzu stalks the aisles. Kento presses Hina into the shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The boots stop. They pivot. The old man turns back to the exit. Kento dares to exhale, thinking the nightmare has passed. But you should never relax in the dark. A single bloodshot eye presses against a crack in the wood. He wasn't leaving. He was toying with them. His voice drops to a sickening croon. Found you, Hina-sama. The girl flinches under the fabric. The predator has them cornered. Under the harsh sun, the farm operates with clockwork precision. Yoiko barks orders, assigning heavy lifting to the boys and planting to the girls. Kento feigns obedience, but his knuckles turn white against the wood. He knows a girl is rotting in the storehouse just yards away. He watches the adults. Their laughter rings hollow, and their kindness is nothing but a porcelain mask. Every instinct screams at him to shatter the lock on that prison, but he knows the rules of survival. One slip-up, and he joins her in the dark. His thoughts bleed back to the prisoner, Hina. He's already haunted by her unseen face, but reality has a nasty way of snapping the leash. The blonde loudmouth locks him in a playful chokehold. He mistakes Kento's pale face for a schoolboy crush on the taskmaster. Kento flails, desperate to bury his terror beneath a mask of embarrassment. Then, the playfulness vanishes. He leans in, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. He tells them he witnessed something vile this morning. The temperature seems to plummet, but before the truth can spill, a long shadow falls over the group. Yoiko stands over them, smiling like a shark sensing blood. Her warning echoed in the dark recesses of his mind, "Don't go in there." But the paralyzing fear for Hina won out. He had to move. He turned to run, stammering a desperate lie about needing the bathroom. Yuiko didn't buy it. She shadowed his every step like a predator. I said, she caught him cold. "The bathroom isn't that way." She leaned in close, practically smelling the guilt radiating off him. Her eyes narrowed. "You're going to the storehouse, aren't you?" Elsewhere, safety was a fragile illusion. The phone lines were dead. They hunted for the teacher, cursing the worthless bastard for disappearing when they needed him most. But he wouldn't answer. His phone lay crushed in the dark, utterly silent. The girl's question froze the blood in his veins. Why ask about the storehouse? Kento's mind raced. She was definitely one of them. He forced a casual denial, claiming a stomachache had trapped him in the bathroom all morning. But doubt gnawed at him immediately. Did that lie sound as hollow as it felt? To his shock, the tension evaporated. She smiled, her eyes wide with relief that he was unharmed. She asked if he had recovered. He lied again, saying yes. But while his face remained a mask of calm, his hand crushed his own wrist in a spasm of pure terror. She led the way, teasing him for getting lost. But the sight of her back triggered a violent flash of the past, dragging him toward the trees, to that cursed fruit. Shunya flaunted the harvest, offering his spine as a step stool, yet earning nothing but Satsuki's cold scorn. Kento turned away. He needed to find Hina. But her voice snapped from the canopy above. "Piku!" She grinned, inviting him to touch the fruit. Paranoia clawed at his throat. Surrounded by the clan, Kento felt a dozen pairs of eyes boring into his skull. He froze, knowing one wrong twitch would sign his death warrant. He forced the food down his throat, but his mind drifted to the darkness, to Hina. He could still feel her fragile frame, and those hands, cold as the grave. Then, a crack in the facade. The family gorged themselves on sweet persimmons, yet not a single soul offered a scrap to the storehouse. This was the moment. He grabbed the pale kid and the hooded one, dragging them into his desperate scheme. While the adults cackled in the other room, he hissed the plan. Create a diversion. Buy him enough time to disappear into the shadows. Kento begged for accomplices, his hands clasped in desperate prayer. The hooded figure weighed the cost of betrayal before nodding a silent assent. But fate is a cruel mistress. A blonde tyrant stormed their conspiracy, demanding labor. Kento didn't flinch. He twisted the interruption into an alibi. He cornered Minamo next. He demanded rations, rice balls, ignoring her protests about the dinner he'd barely touched. She yielded, handing over the tray with a scowl. Kento snatched the cargo and vanished, leaving his friends to clean up the mess. Satsuki watched him go. Kento never asked for favors. This wasn't hunger. It was a survival strategy. Satsuki recalled the cracks in the facade. At the tavern, Kento's laughter was too loud, his pressure on the others too manic. The adults scolded him like a child. But when Yoiko's voice pierced the air, asking for his location, he shattered. He jolted, sending the beer crashing down. A worthless, trembling mess. Now Satsuki stood as the gatekeeper. He intercepted Yoiko on the balcony, but his social skills were atrophied. He stammered a robotic request for conversation. She laughed, disarming him, then struck with the only question that mattered. "Where is Kento?" Satsuki's throat went dry. The walls were closing in. He grasped for a distraction. Acorns, he rasped. He spun a tale of poverty and foraging, expecting disgust. Instead, she beamed, suggesting a harvesting trip for tomorrow. Panic spiked in Satsuki's chest. A search party in the woods would uncover more than just nuts. It would expose the fugitive. Subtlety died. He seized her hand, screaming a demand to eat acorns right now. A lunatic's plea to stop the clock. Yuiko didn't see the fear. She only saw the comedy. She laughed, agreeing to his madness. The distraction held. In the shadows of the hallway, the transaction concluded. Minamo surrendered the food, hiding her flush behind a wall of denial. Kento accepted the tribute. He struck her with a calculated compliment about her future as a wife, leaving her stunned in the corridor. He had the supplies. Now, the real nightmare could begin. He whispered her name into the void. A shadow shifted behind the glass, drawn to the sound of salvation. She didn't speak. She collapsed into him, clinging to the first warmth she'd felt in days. Hunger overrode emotion. She snatched the rice ball, devouring it with frantic, animalistic bites. Kento watched her gorge herself, cold realization settling in. Someone had locked her in here to rot. She stared through him, broken. He grabbed her shoulders, anchoring her back to reality. He wouldn't let her die here. He rattled off a naive plan. Teachers, police, as if the law could touch a place this cursed. He sold her a dream of safety. Friends, laughter, a life outside the cell. Talk is cheap. He set the deadline. Midnight. That's when they break the cage. Satsuki's voice pierced the silence, sharp and sudden. Minamo flinched, her heart hammering against her ribs. He hissed a command for absolute silence. The leader demanded their presence. And there he was. Kento loomed in the doorway, his gaze fixed on them like a predator. They trekked into the darkening woods. Shunya grabbed Satsuki's shoulder, trembling as he begged him not to play the hero. Satsuki just told him to shut his mouth. Nerves began to fray as the storehouse came into view. Forbidden ground. They slid the doors open, and the rotting wood groaned in protest. Inside, Kento sat amidst the wreckage, unnatural stillness radiating from him like a corpse. He pointed a finger into the deep shadows. Someone needed help. A girl, locked away in this filth for years. Satsuki squinted into the abyss, but saw nothing. Kento's voice turned hard as stone. He was breaking her out, but he needed accomplices. He stepped aside, peeling back the veil of secrecy. Ina. She clung to him like a shadow, a scarred specter with eyes that had seen too much hell. Under the sickly buzz of the streetlights, Kento played the saint. He begged the group to accept her, but Hina just clung to his shadow, her scarred face slick with fresh tears. The others stared back, weighing the broken girl in cold silence. He dragged them to a storeroom that smelled of dust and dead gods. The friends snapped, tired of his cryptic midnight games among the severed statue heads. Kento ignored the tension, forcing a connection. He demanded a handshake to break the ice. He seized a wrist, dragging the reluctant flesh forward. The gap closed, but Hina froze. Her body convulsed, sensing the invisible malice rotting right beside her. The abomination lashed out, a shrieking nightmare manifested from the dark, throwing her into a blind panic. Gravity took her. She slammed into the floorboards with a sickening thud. Kento's composure shattered. He scrambled to the bottom of the stairs, ignoring the stunned onlookers. He scooped her up, screaming her name, begging for a response that never came. Satsuki recoiled in disgust, insisting he cradled nothing but a filthy, discarded doll. Kento froze, the glass of his sanity cracking under the strain. He snarled at them, swearing on his life that a living, breathing girl was trapped in that darkness. The black mass pulsed and wobbled in his grip. Ignoring their pleas, he ground the heavy iron door open with a shriek of rusted metal. The long-haired girl lunged, screaming for him to drop the wretched thing before it was too late. He roared like a beast, demanding they bow before the monstrosity. The sheer madness of his outburst sent the group stumbling back in terror. Metal clattered sharply against the concrete as the tension finally snapped. They swarmed him, clawing at his jacket like desperate animals. Kento thrashed wildly, vowing to rot alongside Hina for all eternity. He He threw a desperate block, fighting off the very people trying to save his soul. But the numbers were against him. They overpowered his flailing limbs, dragging his heels through the grime. His agonized screams for Himta faded into the silence of the cold, dead night. But the madness summoned a spectator. A door creaked open, revealing a pale woman in a kimono, watching from the gloom. The students didn't notice her. They were too busy binding Kento like a rabid animal, ignoring his muffled pleas. Satsuki justified the cruelty. She couldn't let him hurt anyone else. She snapped at the others, demanding they call for help, but the line was dead. The girl held up the receiver. Nothing but silence. Running was out of the question. The woods were pitch black and unfamiliar. They were trapped here until dawn. Someone suggested telling the caretaker, Shozo. Satsuki's eyes went wide with terror. She realized they had stumbled onto a curse, and speaking of it would only dig their graves. Satsuki hissed a warning, telling them to keep their mouths shut until the teacher returned. Morning broke with the mocking chirp of birds. Satsuki jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat. He stared at the empty bedding. Kento was gone. A sinking feeling hit him. That fool had gone to the forbidden storehouse. They didn't waste a second, sprinting across the yard to stop him. Inside the darkness, a single dilated pupil trembled in sheer terror. Satsuki threw open the heavy doors, screaming his friend's name. But they froze, staring down at the grotesque mass waiting for them on the floor. A woman in a blood-soaked kimono loomed over Kento, her one good eye piercing their very souls. Seinen, a scream tore through the stagnant air. She shrieked his name, desperate to wake him from this nightmare. Panic seized them. They rushed forward, blind to the danger. The entity sat amidst the debris, watching them crumble. Satsuki recoiled in horror, while Shozu demanded answers. A trembling voice whispered the name, Hina-sama. Realizing exactly what she was, Shozu didn't wait. He roared for everyone to run. Foster 6 is Ben, wandering in from 2 I am Shozer. Although, Mike Lewis, the kid delivered the news with a dead-eyed stare. Kento wasn't just missing. He was devoured by a damn doll. Satsuki's stomach turned inside out. He lurched for the sink, gripping the porcelain like a lifeline. Bile burned his throat. He gagged, spitting out the taste of pure fear. He slid to the floor, clutching his arm. There was no waking up from this nightmare. In the next room, the rest of the flock huddled together, mourning their dead friend. The weeping girl couldn't wrap her head around the cruelty. Who would do such a thing? The blonde snapped his attention to the doorway, sensing a shift in the air. Satsuki stepped into the light, eyes hollow. He confirmed their suspicions. He delivered the grim truth. Kento was murdered, and the butcher was still loose. The word hung in the air like a guillotine. Murdered. And the terrifying follow-up question, by whom? Outside, footsteps creaked on the wooden boards. Inside, the phone line was dead. No police. No help. Panic shifted to Kento. He had gone to the storehouse. Regret washed over them. They should have warned him. Instead of trusting chains, the earthquake had already shattered. He admitted the truth. He stayed silent to avoid piquing their curiosity. The revelation made the room spin. She could barely keep her balance. Shuzu barked orders. Lock everything. They were fetching the police. He grabbed her, eyes wild. Never enter the storehouse. In the car, Yoiko spotted Hina-sama, but Shuzu slammed her curiosity shut. If that secret got out, the family was finished. Silence reclaimed the house. Mai was tucked away in the back room, oblivious, but the adults were gone. The safety net had vanished. The realization hit them cold. They were alone. Minamo grabbed her head, screaming the quiet part out loud. The killer was still hunting them. Fear hit them like a physical blow. Satsuki snapped them out of it. They had to survive until the police arrived. Minamo ran to hunt for weapons. The others split up to secure the locks. Satsuki left them with one rule: if you see that doll, scream for your life. A heavy golf bag slammed against the floorboards. The group sat paralyzed, drowning in the sudden, suffocating quiet. Tick-tock, the clock sounded like a countdown to execution. Minamo finally whispered the fear. Where were the adults? Yoiko grasped at lies to stay sane. A landslide? A storm? Satsuki pictured them butchered. But if the secret leaked, they were damned. The group cornered Yoiko, demanding answers. Minamo asked the question hanging in the air, is it dangerous? But the fear went deeper. Was this why the storehouse was a forbidden zone? Satsuki didn't ask, he accused. Kento had found the trigger, hadn't he? Yoiko finally broke. She gathered them in the study to unveil the village idol, Hina-sama. A generational curse disguised as a guardian. It granted wishes, certainly, but gods always demand a tribute. In the old days, villagers paid with human lives during droughts. Modernity softened the blow to simple offerings. Shuzu had shackled Yoiko to this duty. You protect it forever. She dismissed it as superstition, until she walked past the altar room and found the pedestal bare. The thing was loose. She demanded answers. Shuzu claimed he moved it for safety, a flimsy lie. She knew where it was, the storehouse. Curiosity pulled her hand to the wood. Violence answered. The slap stung, but his expression hurt worse, pure malice. He roared a single command, stay away. The mask of the loving father slipped, revealing the fanatic underneath. Yoiko confessed to the group. She didn't stop them to hide the truth. She stopped them to save their skins. Yoiko's composure shattered. She realized too late that curiosity had signed their death warrants. The rest of the flock stood silent, the cold sweat of regret soaking their uniforms. Sure. But Mai didn't panic. She just nodded, accepting the nightmare as fact. She delivered the autopsy report without blinking. Kento wasn't missing. The doll had devoured him. It was a simple transaction. He broke the vow, so he paid with his flesh. The truth took a physical toll. Mai's knees buckled under the weight of the curse. Her face went gray. She doubled over, heaving violently into Minamo's shoulder as her body tried to purge the terror. The others scrambled in blind panic, offering water, desperate to fix something broken beyond repair. But then, the nausea evaporated. A twisted, euphoric smile cut across her face. She wasn't talking to them anymore. She was thanking the monster, Hina-sama. The white-haired boy tried to play the hero, swearing the police wouldn't just abandon them in this hellhole. But hope rotted away fast. The girls froze, and Satsuki felt the cold sweat of realization slick his skin. He finally snapped. It had been 9 hours. No one was coming to save them. He muttered a hollow lie about safety and walked out, turning his back on Minamo's desperate screams. He stepped into the dim corridor, armed only with a mop, listening to the house groan around him like a dying beast. It was identical to his nightmare. That dead doll staring up from the muck. His hands trembled violently. He threw open the window to signal Takatori before sunset, but a hand snatched him from the darkness. Satsuki tried to slip into the shadows, but Shunya slammed him against the wall, choking the air from his lungs. He roared at the fool for courting death alone. Satsuki could not meet his gaze. He would rather die alone than watch another friend rot in the dirt. Satsuki played the martyr, but Shunya was not buying the act. He turned away, feigning cold indifference. He announced he was going alone too. Just two stubborn loners, marching toward the same hell. Shunya took point, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the empty hall. He glanced back, hiding his fear behind bravado. If they saw a shadow, they would run. Then Yoko's voice cut through the gloom, stopping them cold. She demanded a spot on the suicide mission because she knew the terrain. Shunya argued the risk, but she was immovable. He tried to form a squad, but the crippled girl in the bed was an anchor they could not lift. Satsuki ordered her to stay and guard the fortress. The girls needed a sentinel, not a corpse. Yoiko ignored the command. She threw open the door, stepping past him with a reckless promise. Then she revealed her secret weapon. The boys froze. A hunting rifle, heavy with oil and intent. She shoved the steel into their hands. You do not need aim to be terrifying. She swore to shield the weak with her own body. Satsuki locked eyes with her. The deal was struck. Satsuki aimed for the rendezvous point, consulting the guide for salvation. But the map was a scribbled abomination of twisted lines. They stared at the ink blot mess, and Shunya screamed at the sheer incompetence. Somehow, the wretched scrawl led them to the hall. Stepped into, but the door rattled, locked tight against their grip. Shunya raged at the isolation, cursing their dead phones and the silence. The interior lay in suffocating stillness. He called out, but his voice died in the doorway. Yet traces of life remained. A travel bag sat waiting. Slippers stood abandoned. A jacket hung like a ghost, and the vanity was cluttered with bottles. Then he saw it. That luggage did not belong to a man. He pounded on the doorframe, demanding answers. Was the teacher hiding a secret lover in this wasteland? He vowed to expose the scandal, laughing at the twisted irony of it all. The mountain path was treacherous in the dark, and Shunya paid the price. His foot slipped, sending a jolt of pain up his spine while his gear clattered into the abyss. Satsuki, cold as ever, didn't offer sympathy, just a hand to pull the clumsy fool back from the edge. Exhaustion set in like a rot. They dragged their heavy limbs toward the gathering hall, the silence between them growing thicker with every step. The night sky offered no comfort, only vast, empty darkness. Satsuki finally broke the quiet with a grim obsession. Why was Kento the one to die? Was it punishment for seeing the doll in the storehouse? Shunya scoffed at the logic. Killers don't need reasons. Any fresh meat will do. But the hooded boy wasn't listening. His eyes went dead as he whispered the truth. If the monster wanted a victim, it should have been him. Kento had a family. People who would weep over his corpse. Satsuki? He had no parents. No one to mourn if he vanished into the dark. Shunya snapped. He seized Satsuki by the collar, rage boiling over at the self-pity. He wouldn't let his friend talk like he was already dead. But the argument died in their throats. A sinister orange glow stained the horizon. It wasn't the sunrise. It was an inferno. The temple was burning. A figure emerged from the gloom, an old local mistaking the distant inferno for a festive bonfire. He shined his beam on the students, eyeing the mud caked on their uniforms. Shunya ignored the filth. He screamed, desperate to find a phone to call the missing boy's parents. The old man hushed them, pointing a withered finger toward his home nearby. They thanked him, foolish gratitude washing away their fear. With one phone call, they thought they could save the rest of the herd. Satsuki asked for the line, and like sheep they followed the stranger deeper into the dark. But the sanctuary held a nasty surprise. Satsuki froze, staring up at the rotting wood. This house also had a storehouse, another barred cage looming over them. Kanetome confirmed the authorities were already en route to the Hasakura estate. Satsuki stood trembling, desperate for them to intervene before the slaughter began. The assurance brought relief, but terror burns energy. A loud growl erupted from the blonde's gut. They hadn't eaten since the nightmare started. Kanetome chuckled at the noise, inviting the survivors in for a warm supper. The Hasakura estate stood silent, a gilded cage for the trembling survivors. Inside, the girls huddled together, praying the boys would return with the teacher before the darkness took them too. Minamo refused to eat. Her stomach knotted with grief. Her friend forced a brave smile and marched to the kitchen to prepare a meal, leaving the blonde alone with her spiraling thoughts. A guttural howl tore through the night, a sound of pure hunger that vibrated through the floorboards. The redhead returned with dinner, calling out to her friends, but only silence answered. Cold sweat pricked her skin. She whispered Minamo's name and rushed to the window. The sight in the garden made her fingers go numb, and the tray crashed to the floor. Minamo was out there, drifting toward the shadows like a moth to a flame. Her friend sprinted into the night, screaming for her to stop before the shadows bit back. She tackled her right in front of the forbidden storehouse. She shook the dazed girl, demanding to know why she would walk straight into the dark after trembling in fear just hours ago. The howling grew closer, a circle of hunger closing in. Minamo was not possessed. She was desperate. She knew the hounds were coming. She could not let Kento's body be devoured by scavengers. She tried to push past, but her friend blocked the path, terrified of breaking her father's one rule: never enter the shed. They found a desperate solution. If they could not move him, they would seal him in. They heaved the heavy wooden door shut and jammed a log into the brackets to keep the beasts out. The friend gave one final shivering warning. Whatever you do not look inside. Minamo nodded, but curiosity is a curse. Her eye darted to the gap and the air froze in her lungs. The storehouse was not a tomb, it was an empty cell. Hina-sama was gone. The blonde stared at his bowl in absolute horror. Cucumbers. Green, slimy, repulsive. To him, it wasn't food, it was poison. Kanetome insisted they eat, his voice dripping with false warmth. But Satsuki refused. How could he fill his stomach while the girls were out there, alone in the dark? He shoved the food into his mouth, desperate to obey, but his throat constricted, a biological revolt against the meal. Every bite tasted like ash. The old man swore the police were on their way, but Satsuki knew the truth. The authorities wouldn't bring safety. They would bring questions, suspicion, and cages for their friends. Kanetome's smile didn't reach his eyes. He smothered them with suffocating hospitality, commanding the blonde to keep eating, oblivious to the terror thickening the air. The blonde froze. His trembling finger rose, pointing toward the shadowy corner. Something was watching. He forced a laugh, blaming his tired eyes. Then, the air grew cold as he asked the real question. "Do you live here all alone?" Light glinted off the old man's glasses, obscuring his gaze. Out here in the deep mountains, screams don't travel. Neighbors are miles away. Satsuki's adrenaline finally crashed. His vision blurred, and his head slumped against his friend's shoulder. Darkness took him. His body slept, but his mind refused to rest. It dragged him down into the abyss of memory, whispering a single name: Kento. The nightmare of that night clawed at him. If they had just kept watch, if they hadn't been so careless, would Kento still be breathing? Hot tears leaked from his closed eyes. Kanetome loomed over him, his hand landing heavy on Satsuki's back, a comforting gesture that felt like a trap. The old man whispered promises of rest. "You did a good job," he crooned. "Let the adults handle the rest." 1:32 a.m. The witching hour. The blonde boy gave up on sleep, remembering he had to call Tori. He crept into the hallway, the darkness swallowing the house whole. He fumbled for the switch, fighting the shadows until his fingers found the phone. Silence. The line was dead. He tapped the hook, praying for a signal. A cold memory surfaced. Kanetome had just used this exact phone to report a tragedy. Why would it stop working now? His eyes snagged on a letter. The addressee was Kanetome. The pieces clicked into a terrifying picture. Panic ignited. He launched himself down the hall, crashing into the bedroom to scream Satsuki's name. They had to wake up. The house was too quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. He shook his friend, desperation clawing at his throat. This was Kanetome's territory, and they were trespassing. The door slid open. Kanetome asked a simple question that froze the blood in their veins. "You didn't eat the miso soup?" The realization hit hard. Was it poisoned? The old man loomed in the frame, gripping an axe like a butcher's cleaver. He stared them down with a dead-eyed gaze. "It's not good to be so picky." The old freak stood frozen, axes framing his head like a halo of iron. The kid scrambled back, terror locking his limbs. Cold sweat drenched him, asking if this was all for a doll. "You know," the old man turned away, swearing to never surrender his treasure. He spat at them, calling the modern generation nothing but thieves. The boy stammered, reminding the lunatic that he was the one who invited them inside. The madman ignored the logic, stepping forward to accuse them of bringing guns. He admitted his kindness was just a mask to lower their guard. A twisted grin split his face as he prepared to kill for Hinasama. He lunged, thrusting the cold steel at their legs. Satsuki's eyes went wide, adrenaline finally flooding his bloodstream. The maniac mocked them, wishing they had eaten his poisoned soup. They didn't wait for the punchline, sprinting into the hallway. Satsuki lagged behind, his body screaming in protest. But he swallowed the pain, shouting at his partner to keep moving. They slammed the sliding doors, putting a thin wall between them and death. They tore open the next door to a nightmare. Blood painted the walls, soaking the twisted corpses of their friends. Satsuki froze, recognizing the mangled faces of Group 4. In the dead silence, a monitor beeped. The nightmare dissolves into the blinding white sting of a hospital light. He forces his heavy eyes open, fighting the anesthesia. The world is a blur of shouting nurses, their voices piercing the fog to confirm he is back. Reality crashes down. He jolts awake, lungs heaving against the plastic mask. Panic floods his veins. Wide-eyed, sweating, he realizes he is alive. A nurse tries to calm him. He has been out for days. She explains he is the only one here. He survived the cave-in, wedged into a narrow gap in the crushing rocks. A statistical miracle. But the teacher does not care about his own luck. He bolts upright, screaming for his students. Outside, the media vultures are already picking at the bones. They demand a quote from the miracle survivor. Inside, parents tear through the staff, begging for news. But the TV anchor delivers the kill shot. 3 days have passed. The kids are still trapped. In the middle of the storm, a man in a suit politely forces his way through the blockade. He lies with a smile, just visiting a friend. His shoes click against the linoleum, a rhythmic march toward the truth. Inside the room, the survivor stares at the paper. The headline is a death sentence. 33 students. Fate unknown. Takatori drags his bandaged frame toward the edge, but his legs fail, slamming him hard against the cold linoleum. The nurse rushes in, begging him to stay down. He ignores the pain, screaming that he can't just lie there and rot. He left 33 lives behind in that hellhole. He has to go back. The nurse stares at him with pity, delivering a blow worse than any injury. There is no village beyond that tunnel. His blood runs cold. He grabs her uniform, desperate to make sense of the madness. It has to be a lie, because reality tells a different story. That valley is nothing but a mass grave, wiped off the map 10 years ago. Locals call it a demon village, a cursed pile of rubble where no human has drawn breath in a decade.
So where did the students go?
She insists it's just a ghost story, a haunted ruin beyond Doll Pass. Takatori refuses to accept it. He met the villagers. He drove their car. He held the invitation in his own hands. She tells him his brain is broken, scrambled by the crash. Then, the rhythmic tap of dress shoes cuts through the denial. A stranger looms in the doorway, knowing the name of the nightmare. But the guy isn't an interrogator. He is admiring the view. Takatori feels a chill that has nothing to do with ghosts. The nurse steps in to shield her patient before the creep can get any closer. The stranger sobers up and drops a card. Ukamagaya. An occult reporter. And he has a simple question. Do you want to find the truth? 30 students embarked on a rural experience. None returned. The authorities are already sweating, blaming the teacher for leading lambs to the slaughter. A bandaged survivor searches for answers, but the trail goes cold. The teacher lies unconscious, trapped in a hospital bed. The driver claims he only dropped them off. He saw nothing. No villagers, no life. Just Sakigami Village, a grave that has been closed for 10 years. Wrapped in layers of white gauze, the survivor stood alone in the suffocating silence. His lip curled at the cheap magazine, tossing aside the ridiculous stories of alien invaders. The silence shattered as his phone screamed for attention. The voice on the line was cold, skipping the pleasantries to offer a dangerous partnership. The grandfather clock marks the death of another day, dragging the world past midnight. Inside the tatami room, the girls maintain their grim vigil over Kento's unconscious form. They whisper about a mind shattered by grief. There is no fixing her, not after she watched her beloved get butchered. That darkness bleeds into the memories of school. Yoiko reveals the secret she heard while sweeping the grounds. Another girl has claimed Kento's heart. Minamo freezes. The betrayal snaps her composure, her voice rising in disbelief. She was left in the dark. The apology offers no comfort to her shattered pride. The memory fades into the gloom. The sting of exclusion brings tears to her eyes. The air in the room turns heavy with unspoken resentment. Minamo cannot stomach the tension, fleeing the room under the guise of making coffee. Yoiko turns to the boy. He is awake but shivering, the cold seeping deep into his marrow. The house sat in heavy silence, shadows stretching like oil across the floorboards. Yoiko crept forward, ears straining against the quiet. A faint scratch echoed from the master bedroom. Minamo's voice sliced through the gloom, demanding blankets. Yoiko lingered by the wash basin, water dripping from the tap. Her reflection looked pale, eyes wide and darting. A thud behind her made her spin around. She slid the door open with trembling fingers, breath hitched in her throat, hoping to find nothing but dust. But what she found was a cage. Every inch of the room was plastered with paper sealing charms, layered thick to hold back some unseen abomination. Yoiko stepped into the shrine, the air stale and thick enough to choke on. It smelled of old paper and incense, suffocating under the weight of 1,000 talismans. She forced a dry laugh, trying to dismiss the wards as some twisted tradition, but the cold sweat on her neck betrayed her. She had a job to do. As she reached for the bedding, a shape shifted underneath. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Slowly, she peeled back the cover. A pale, dead hand shot out, gripping the fabric tight. Yoiko screamed, stumbling back until her spine hit the wall. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet, the whole room shuddering as if waking from a nightmare.
Then the void opened up. A swarm of pale limbs erupted from the darkness, clawing desperately at the stale air.
Yoiko gagged, bile rising in her throat as she scrambled backward to escape the grasping fingers. But they weren't flesh and blood. They were cold porcelain, hundreds of tiny doll parts clicking together. The realization made her blood run cold. Every single one of them was a left hand. Cold grip clamped onto her shoulder. Yoiko shrieked, flinching away from the touch. It was only Minamo, tilting her head in confusion. She smiled, offering to help carry the load, completely ignoring the mountain of limbs spilling from the closet. The dark liquid rippled, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Yoiko watched, eyes narrowing at the tremor. She asked a simple question, and Minamo snapped. The mood shifted instantly, the air growing heavy. Minamo looked away, trying to hide in the shadows. She claimed she was fine, but Yoiko called it a lie.
Then, the walls closed in. This was her parents' room.
Cold sweat beaded on her skin.
Yoiko snapped. She screamed, demanding the truth about this hellhole.
A chime rang out. Sharp and sudden, every muscle tensed, the entire room froze in silence.
Yoiko dared to hope. It had to be Sato.
Minamo didn't think. She sprinted toward the door. Yoiko scrambled to stop her, sensing a trap. She raced down the empty corridor, breathless and desperate. A shadow loomed behind the frosted glass. It was him.
She reached for the lock. He screamed for her to hurry.
The latch clicked open, but he didn't want in. He wanted out. A glowing hand slammed against the glass. The girls shrieked, stumbling back in terror. For a second, nothing moved. Then, black sludge began to weep from the print. It trickled down the pane like rotten blood.
Do you believe in bad omens?
The first day of the rural retreat began with a torrential, weeping downpour. A low, sickly groan echoed through the dim room. Riku clutched his gut, his body twisting in sudden agony. His friends, blind to the danger, foolishly dismissed it as nothing more than hiccups. Hours earlier, the bus ride had been a festering pit of irritation and noise. Kyusuke hid behind his mask, his mind rotting with a single wish: that everyone around him would just drop dead. He had tried to escape this fate, but his teacher, Takatori, dragged his parents into it, forcing the truant boy back into line. Now, sinking his boots into the wet grass, he realized the trap had snapped shut. He never wanted to come to this cursed place. But the isolation wasn't the real torture. It was the company. He looked up at the dysfunctional freak show he was forced to call a team. Riku, the pineapple-headed thug, barked orders to work, but nobody respected him. Seika, the plastic princess, ignored him. She was too busy fixing her face, swearing she'd kill herself if she had to live in this filth. And Mimi tried to force a smile, babbling about making memories to mask her disgust. And Kurisu, the spineless nerd, he was already trying to deflect responsibility to their leader. Kyusuke just stood there, silent. The locals stared back, their eyes hollow, judging the intruders. An old woman broke the standoff, handing them tools. She knew the silence of the countryside was suffocating for city brats. She spoke of the past, when the village brewed sake and teemed with life, before it withered into a retirement home. But the mention of alcohol snapped the idiots to attention. They smelled a drink. Shingo identified the target, a rotting storage shed, decaying in the gloom. The group was shaking, desperate for a single drop of alcohol. Four Eyes cracked a smile, proposing a midnight break-in. The pack agreed instantly. Only Kyusuke hesitated, the stench of trouble filling the air. But they weren't alone. The masked kid was lurking. Ria spotted the rat immediately, shrieking at the intrusion. He spat a curse at the blonde, but she cut him off, accusing him of planning to snitch. He never had a chance to run. Riku snagged his collar, dragging him into the circle. He wasn't a witness anymore. He was an accomplice. Shadows lengthened across the silent mountain compound. And fifth, Riku skipped the pleasantries, driving his boots straight through the front entrance. The wood splintered, and the group stepped inside, praising the vandalism. They raided the cellar next, sliding open heavy timber doors to reveal the hoard. Dusty bottles lined the shelves. Four Eyes insisted the ancient rot was safe to consume. The girls giggled in the dark, treating this tomb like a cheap dive bar. The masked hostage lingered behind, seething at their backs. He tapped a furious message on his phone, praying for their swift execution. In ship deeper in, Ryukun spotted a crate blocking the path to the inner sanctum. Curiosity took over. The rusty latch snapped open with a sharp click. A porcelain doll sat in the gloom, its face scarred by malice. Rhea recoiled, her scream echoing off the cold walls. Shingo froze. He whispered it was a cursed object, something meant to kill. Riku scoffed at the superstition, while the women poured the stolen sake, toasting to their own ignorance. Filthy water poured off the figure, yet the creeps only saw a wet beauty. The blonde sneered, ordering them to ignore the weeping doll and drink. The earth lurched, slamming the room sideways. So joins Antiwa. Shingo giggled at the tremor, but Rhea screamed a warning. Only the cripple had the sense to shield his head. Glass shrapnel exploded from the shelves. Rhea shrieked, demanding they hide. Shingo shrugged, too arrogant to move. She spotted the table and dove into the safety of the dark. Fear drenched her face in the void. Shingo burst through the door, shouting her name. Rhea clawed her way out, collapsing in a heap. The giant snatched her hair, hoisting her up like trash. They froze. A gnarled human arm dangled from the kimono. Have you ever ignored your gut instinct just to feel safe? The masked kid buries his face in a screen, desperate to block out reality. But reality finds him. The Mohawk and his crew loom over the boy, their faces drained of all blood. The kid shrinks back, asking why they look like walking corpses. Plaque. Plagues. Room. Denied Basserstown. Within. Which shish. Moments earlier, Hoshika tried to laugh off the horror. She swore those severed limbs were just plastic doll parts. Spiky didn't buy it. The air didn't smell like fertilizer. It reeked of wet meat. Now, huddled in the tatami room, Hoshika repeats the lie. But looking at the others, the rot is already spreading. Day 1 in the wilderness. The sun was up. Four Eyes woke up in hell. His head throbbed with the dull ache of a chemical hangover. He blindly clawed for his glasses, desperate to bring the world into focus. But sight was a mistake. The room was a nest. Pale women in patterned kimonos infested every corner. They peered from the closets, dangled from the attic hatch, and loomed over his bed. A dozen pairs of dead eyes, all fixed on him. He shrieked like a dying animal. Spiky jolted up, heart pounding, ready for a fight. But the enemy wasn't there. The nerd was just vibrating under the sheets, whispering about a doll. Spiky sneered, asking what the hell he was babbling about. But the cold sweat on the kid's face? That wasn't a hallucination. Metal ground against the parched soil, the sound vibrating up his arms. He heaved the heavy iron, ignoring the old hag's condescending praise. Sweat stung his eyes as he glared at the slackers on the hill. Why was he the only one condemned to this rot? A sudden, pathetic squeal tore through the air. Ah, I undersensed that sudden, pathetic squeal tore through the air. That sudden, pathetic squeal tore through the air. Bye. 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 Now. Bye. Bye. The coward pointed a trembling finger at the tree line, screaming about eyes in the shadows. Spiky just spat, telling him to shut the hell up. The nerd insisted they were surrounded by invisible threats. The girl snapped, telling him to save the ghost stories. A sudden touch sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She looked down and exhaled. It was just a stray cat. She lowered her guard, inviting the little beast closer. Ksh. Sisters did support her from place like this. But the darkness smiled back, with a mocking human grin. That wasn't an animal. It was a flesh-eating abomination wearing a girl's face. Her sanity fractured in an instant. She scrambled backward in terror, collapsing into the cold mud. She pointed a trembling finger at the monster, but her friend only saw the mud on her skirt. The old crones sneered at the mud caking their clothes. The spiky-haired girl begged to join the bath, clinging to Hashika like a frightened parasite. Oshika wasn't having it. She shoved the girl away, claiming the sanctuary of the hot water for herself alone. The lock clicked shut. She stripped off the grime, muttering curses at the idiots outside. For a moment, the silence felt safe. She sank into the tub, letting the scalding heat burn away the stress. Her mind drifted to Four Eyes, dismissing his warnings as nothing more than childish pranks. She took a deep breath and splashed water over her face, trying to wash away the lingering fear. But when the water cleared from her eyes, a rotting face was staring right at her from the shadows. Panic seized her throat. She screamed, scrambling out of the water and sprinting for the door with wet, trembling feet. She burst into the hall, shivering and half naked. She demanded to know who put that doll in the tub. Four Eyes tried to comfort her, but she was trembling with pure rage. She turned her accusation on the old hag. It had to be her doing, but the answer was a cold, flat denial. Back in the tub, the thing bobbed in the scum. Four Eyes confirmed the horror. That was no toy, it was a curse. Dinner began in suffocating silence until the fork froze in midair. A hand snatched the meat with feral aggression, leaving the masked boy paralyzed with shock. The others scrambled back, screaming for the abomination to vanish. But the brute kept chewing, oblivious to their terror. He stared into his glass. The liquid rippled without a breeze, thickening into a black, oily sludge. A face formed in the dregs, a smiling, hateful thing that turned the blood in his veins to ice. It whispered to him, feeding on his fear. Surrounded by a legion of cackling dolls, his sanity finally fractured. The room collapsed into hysteria, but the masked boy saw nothing, isolated in his own confusion. A sudden crash shattered the screaming. The old woman stood there, watching them unravel into dead silence. Her voice trembled from the darkness, asking if they dared to breach the storehouse. The punk scoffed, trying to act tough, but she snapped, screaming at the damn fools. The elders loomed in the doorway, sealing the group inside their own nightmare. Then, the cold truth hit them. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The room reeked of cold sweat and panic. The group huddled together, whispering about consequences that could never be undone. Then the elder delivered the death sentence. Hina-sama wasn't just upset, she was furious. The silence that followed was heavy, the name hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Kazuyoki felt the blood drain from his face. He knew exactly what that kind of anger meant. Out in the corridor, the doctor suddenly snapped, his eyes locking onto something invisible. He grabbed Kageoki by the shoulder, desperate. "Tell me you see it!" He pointed wildly at the empty air, screaming about giant Japanese dolls towering over them. Kazuyoki didn't flinch. He just stared at the man, wondering if the doctor was tripping on bad acid. But the terror was real. The doctor wailed, realizing this nightmare was a private screening, just for them. The Chester, the elder barked a command, cutting through the panic. They were going to the temple. The group froze at the foot of the stairs. Did this fool really think chanting prayers would make the abominations vanish? The old man sneered. If they were cursed, that was their problem. But he was offering the only exit. He leaned down, demanding an answer. Trust him and live, or stay here and let the curse finish the job. The sanctuary sat in silence, surrounded by suffocating greenery. The 5 delinquents stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting for judgment like cattle. The head priest didn't waste time with pleasantries. He demanded to know which one of them had the gall to spit on Lady Hina. The elders washed their hands of the problem, leaving the children to their fate. Shingo, the nervous wreck, stammered out a pathetic apology, but the priest ignored him, reciting the grim history. This wasn't just a statue. It was carved from trees that drank the blood of the buried dead. It harbored a living soul. Worship it, and your deepest desires are granted. But disrespect it? The priest's voice cracked like a whip. Punishment is absolute. The group exchanged terrified glances, the weight of their sins crushing their chests. Then, the old man's face softened into a deceptive smile. Sincerity would buy their lives. The kids dropped to their knees, screaming for forgiveness like desperate animals. All except Kazuyoki. He scoffed at the occult theater, calling them insane. But the priest just turned and led them into the darkness. They arrived at a rotting shrine deep in the woods. The priest pointed to a circle of gray ash on the floorboards. He ordered them inside the barrier. Hoshika hesitated, mistaking the ritual for a game. Behind them, an old woman grabbed Kazuyoki, her voice trembling. She knew he didn't belong in that circle. The elder feigned a grandfatherly kindness, offering Kazuyoki a chance to lie about the forbidden storehouse. But the four-eyed coward snapped. Shingo screamed the truth, dragging Kazuyoki down with him. The betrayal hung heavy in the stagnant air. Pleasantries evaporated. They were herded onto the rotting floorboards, forced to stand inside a ring of white ash. The head priest gave them one simple, terrifying command: stay inside the salt, or suffer. His gaze bored into them. No matter what horrors appeared, they could not move. The lights died instantly, and the heavy door clicked shut. A thin line of salt was the only thing separating them from death. Rhea dug her fingers into her scalp, forced to accept that the curse was real. A sudden drop in temperature made them shiver. The cursed dolls were gone. Fear turned sinners into saints. Hoshika swore she would never touch a bottle again. Shingo promised to turn his life around. They bargained with fate, praying that empty promises would be enough to save them. The memory of their laughter mocked them, the matching pendants, the naive promise of eternal friendship. But the shadows whispered the brutal truth. Regret is cheap. You should just die. The heavy bell tolled. The monk began the sutra, his low chanting filling the room with a suffocating drone. Hoshika stared into their eyes, her voice trembling. Do not cross the line, no matter what. They froze inside the double ring of salt, waiting, listening. The light shifted around them as unseen horrors gathered in the dark. But terror takes a physical toll. Hoshika sobbed, her body betraying her. She could not hold it anymore. Riku sneered with disgust, telling her to just do it right there. Shingo snapped, his mind finally breaking. Panic tore the group apart. They screamed accusations at each other, thrashing inside a fragile cage of ash that was ready to crumble. While Riku wasted his breath screaming accusations at the damp walls, the masked boy curled inward, trying to make himself small enough to vanish into the floorboards. Shingo, the trembling four eyes, leaned in close, dropping his voice to a jagged whisper. He confessed that he was shattered. The madness was moving too fast, and his mind could no longer keep pace. He swore that the very second they escaped this cage, he would cut Riku loose and never look back. With a desperate, wavering smile, he pleaded with the boy to be the only ally he kept. Their words died in their throats as a heavy vibration shuddered through the iron doorframe. Riku froze, his petty grievances instantly washed away by the cold sweat of survival instinct. Rhea caught the scent first, a sharp chemical reek that seared the inside of her nostrils like acid. They stared up in horror as a thick, white smog began to descend, swallowing the ceiling in a suffocating haze. Miles away, sanctity was being incinerated. The monks stood motionless, watching their ancient temple dissolve into a roaring pyre of orange flame and black smoke. Chaos tore through the void. Riku clawed at the walls, screaming for freedom, while the punk unraveled into madness. Kazuyoki stood motionless, accepting his demise with pathetic resignation. But in the corner, silence. One girl refused to scream. She clasped her hands, praying to shadows that seemed to whisper back. Desperation took hold. A student slammed his boot against the exit, splintering the wood until the door groaned open, revealing a sliver of the outside world. An old monk stood in the gap, calm as a fresh grave. He glared down at them, accusing the students of igniting the blaze with a stray cigarette. Then, casually picking his nose as if discussing the weather, he delivered the death sentence. Because they had witnessed it, they had to be erased. The girl froze, the horror sinking in. She tore back the cloth to expose the truth. A withered, severed human arm. The nerd did the math instantly. The fire, the accusation. This was no accident. It was a calculated setup. The command was given to the monks. Keep the rats inside. Flames devoured the temple while Riku screamed at the old man, his voice barely rising above the agonizing pleas of the burning. Inside the inferno, the long-haired girl scrambled through the smoke, desperate for an exit. A cold voice stopped her dead. Her friend gripped her arm. "Step outside the circle, and you die." She revealed the twisted truth. The fire wasn't just a trap, it was a ritual to lift the curse. While the thugs swore to butcher the elders, chaos swallowed the room. Kazuyoki ignored the noise. He prowled low, refusing to die in this slaughterhouse. And he saw it. A rusted grate in the floor. Tiny, but a way out. Footsteps thundered down the hall. The Reapers were coming.
He ripped the frame loose and shoved his head into the gap. A suffocating fit. Move or die.
The wood tore at his clothes and scraped his skin raw. With a final desperate heave, he forced his torso through to freedom. He spun around, but a hand clamped onto his collar like a vice. It was Riku. The four eyes glared at him. Why did he think he could survive alone? Then his face twisted into desperation. He begged Kazuyoki to pull him through. He played the friendship card, claiming he never threw a punch, that his hands were clean. But Kazuyoki remembered the truth. How Riku let the wolves bleed him dry for cash. Always smiling, always taking, always counting on his victim to pay the price. Riku smirked, thinking he had his puppet back on the strings. He lunged to drag him back, but Kazuyoki finally cut the cord.
He stared him down and delivered the verdict. You are not my friend.
The prison slammed shut, sealing the target inside a suffocating prism of distorted heat. One lucky rat clawed his way through the smoke, lungs burning with every desperate breath. The witnesses froze, shoulders slumped under the weight of guilt. The boys stared at the dirt, paralyzed by the capture. The commander barked for a status report, terrified their prey had slipped the leash. But the squad confirmed a clean sweep. Elsewhere, the inferno was just getting started. A silhouette of pure malice rose from the flames. The blonde collapsed, choking on the thick black smoke filling her lungs. The catalyst bubbled and warped, flesh melting like wax in a furnace. And from the heart of the blaze, the creature howled with manic glee. The curse wasn't just breaking, it was being obliterated. He scrambled into the night, the heat of the burning estate scorching his heels. But the flames whispered a grim verdict. Everyone was dead. The boy froze, the realization tightening around his throat like a noose. Blind terror has a price. He slipped, plunging into the ravine, his screams swallowed by the jagged rocks below.
He dragged himself onto the pavement. A roadside shrine watched him pass, its doll staring right through his soul.
Then he saw the sign. The Ningyou stock tunnel. The color drained from his face. He had stumbled right into a graveyard. And it was a dead end. A wall of boulders blocked the path, leaving him trapped in the dark. The Hasakura residence stood silent, a traditional tomb buried in the night.
The nameplate on the door confirmed they had stepped straight into hell.
A hand dragged its dirty nails down the wall with a wet, grinding scrape. The girls shrieked, demanding to know who was stalking them in the dark. Panic seized their legs, and they sprinted down the hallway. The sliding door rattled open as they crashed through the exit. It wasn't a ghost waiting for them, but a boy, broken and bleeding among the debris. They scrambled to his side, screaming his name in absolute shock. Twin Tails gasped, her eyes widening as she realized the blood wasn't stopping. She grabbed his shoulder, begging him to stay awake. It was the kid from Group 4, the team that was supposed to be right next to them. Kyusuke let out a weak, rattling groan as the pain hit him. Then he choked out the words that would haunt them forever. Everyone is dead. 14 dead. Another broken body was dragged into the makeshift infirmary. Mari sat amidst the slick crimson, trembling as she braced for the treatment. The assistant's hand shook, realizing the disinfectant bottle was dangerously light. But infection waits for no one. The medic warned her. This is going to burn. The agony tore a raw, guttural scream straight from her lungs. Minamo froze, pupils dilated, paralyzed by the sight of her friend's torment. Hasekura shoved past the panic. Someone had to have the stomach for this butchery. Yoiko jammed a thick cloth between Mari's teeth.
Bite down. Then came the liquid fire, poured directly into the gaping wound.
Mary writhed in a cold sweat, begging for a hospital, but there was no escape. Yoiko pinned her down as she thrashed. There was no mercy here, only grim necessity. Hasakura realized the grim truth. The only real help lay past the dark tunnel. Yoiko didn't wait. She bolted into the shadows, shouting for the others to wait for backup. Yoiko played her hand with unnerving calm. Kudo groaned, his eyes fluttering open to an unfamiliar ceiling. Hasakura tossed him fresh clothes, his voice low as he explained they were guests at the Group 3 safe house. He reminded the boy he had collapsed in a pool of his own blood. Hasakura traced the map, confident Yoiko would bring help. But Kudo lurched upright, his eyes wild with panic. He warned them never to go near that cursed house. A blade hissed through the darkness. It struck meat with a wet thud. Blood painted the walls in a crimson spray. The room was a slaughterhouse. He sat up, surrounded by the mangled corpses of his friends. His fingers brushed against a hand, feeling a lingering warmth. He grabbed it, desperate for any sign of life, but terror paralyzed him. He was not holding a friend. He was gripping a severed stump.
Mari screamed that everyone was dead. Hasakura recoiled, the color draining from his face. She sobbed, recalling only a heavy, unnatural sleep before the massacre began.
Hasakura realized the true scope of the nightmare. Group 4 was gone too. A predator stalked the village shadows, hungry for more. Panic tightened his chest. He shouted for Satsuki and Haruya, praying they were not next. The woods offered no answers, only silence. Hasakura insisted they would have heard screams. He placed his faith in Yoiko, but the others questioned if she could truly be trusted. Mari could still see the butchered bodies of her friends. The monster did not come from outside. She realized with a sickening jolt that the killer had been among the villagers from the very start.
Above the valley, the sky screamed. Streaks of light heralded the coming slaughter.
Satsuki and Hasakura scrambled up the mountain path, lungs burning with every step. But the real pain hit Hasakura's mind. Yoiko wasn't a victim, she was an accomplice.
Behind the chaos, a pair of spectacles glinted in the darkness. Watching, waiting.
Arya spun around, sensing a predator breathing down his neck. Graham planted his feet. He hadn't been chasing them. He revealed the cruel joke. They had been running in circles the entire time.
He raised his axes. No escape, not from this village.
Yoiko burst from the trees, racking a shotgun. A dark shape watched silently from the edge of the woods.
Haruya begged, praying she was there to save them. She smiled, eyes dead as the grave.
"Sorry," she whispered, crushing their last hope. She aimed the double barrel straight at them, signaling her grandfather to close the trap. Twin hatchets sliced the air behind them. The maniac was closing in. They sprinted until their lungs burned, a shout tearing through the orchard shadows. His partner demanded he keep moving, but Sumeragi screamed his guilt, knowing he was the one who dragged her into this hell.
Sumeragi froze. In this place, confusion is a death sentence. The hulking killer charged, blades raised high to split him open. He saw death coming, but a voice screamed the answer.
"Dodge left!" He obeyed instantly, jerking his body aside.
No.
The cleaver swept past, cutting only the air. A split-second difference between life and execution. Then, a cold barrel leveled straight at him. Her voice was polite, but her intent was lethal. She pumped the shotgun with a metallic clack. Above them, a rope snapped tight. Judgment fell from the sky. The iron cage crashed down, crushing the earth and trapping the old man inside. Dust settled on the wooden deck. The threat was finally contained. Yoiko rushed in, panic wild in her eyes as she checked him for blood. Then came the rage. She grabbed him, screaming at his recklessness. Sumeragi breaks the silence, swearing he refuses to watch another body drop. Yoiko matches his rage, screaming that she won't let it happen either. Adrenaline fades into cold exhaustion. He just mutters her name. The blonde kid sprints in, desperate to see if they are still breathing. Regrouping by the fence, Sumeragi offers a grim thanks for the rescue. Yoiko waves it off. She confesses she forced them to keep running for a tactical reason. It was not just an escape, it was a lure. She needed bait to guide the target into her cage. The boys claimed they trusted her plan, even if terror had struck them speechless. The old man waits in the cage, hatchets still in hand.
Yoiko commands him to stay put.
But her gut twists. Why would a man with such a kind face hide such violence? The mob does not care about his face. They scream that he massacres everyone in Group 4. Sumeragi grits his teeth, sweat dripping. Kento is dead because of this man. Yoiko blocks the path. They leave him for the law, not for revenge. The old man laughs off the accusation. He swears he has not killed a single soul. He blames the true horror, a massive doll, feasting on the severed limbs of the dead. Yoiko delivers the news like a death sentence. Kudo crawled to her doorstep, shredded and bleeding, but breathing. She tried to hijack the old man's car for a desperate hospital run. But in this desolate hellhole, distance is fatal. They lost time. The skeptic freezes, glaring at her. He demands to know why a local would risk her neck for tourists. She hefts her weapon, terrifyingly casual. Helping a fugitive beats getting butchered by the hatchet man. Then, a bitter smile cracks her face.
She remembers the isolation. Mothers yanking their children away. Don't go near her, they would hiss. That house belongs to the cursed doll.
For a fleeting moment, she tasted the life she was denied. Posing for photos, picking fruit, the warmth of a pack. But the mask slips under the moonlight. She confesses the rot in her gut. She loved their company, and she was violently jealous. Even in the void of sleep, her body shivers, aching for the warmth of a pack. The door slides open with a hiss. Mina and the shadow conspire in the gloom. A single bead of cold sweat rolls down her temple, betraying her. A fatal slip. The boy leans close, whispering a test to see if she flinches. He tears away the facade. He knows she is wide awake. Exposed, she lets the charade crumble. The observer leans in, dissecting her panic like a scientist examining a specimen. He sees how she chokes down the terror, desperate to survive the herd. She stammers a denial, but the fear is etched into her pale skin. He smiles. He is not judging. He is just another monster in disguise. Doubts gnaw at her gut like parasites. Who can she really trust? Heavy footsteps thunder down the corridor. Mina crashes into the room, eyes wild as she checks for a pulse. Mai dons a mask of bravery, while lies flow from her lips like water. Mina screams through the deception, demanding the truth about Kento. Mai feigns ignorance. What happened to the missing boy? The girl with glasses snaps. She lunges, screaming about their broken pact. Mai recoils, guilt locking her jaw shut like a vice. 9-7. The dark figure steps in, restraining the girl before blood spills on the floor. Mai bares her fangs. You are rotting with secrets too. The girl chokes on her own hypocrisy. Mai presses the blade deeper. Does she know the face of the killer? Mai weaponized their bond, demanding Minamo spill her guts. Kudo joined the offensive, cornering her against the cold wall. Minamo's voice cracked into a weak, pathetic protest. But Mai screamed for the truth, shattering her resolve. Something inside her snapped. 1-6. Minamo scrambled down the hall, desperate to escape the interrogation. Kudo snagged her arm, ending the chase before it truly began. She confessed to the slaughter, claiming every drop of blood was on her hands. Kudo stood paralyzed, his mind unable to process the horror. She thrust the evidence in his face, screaming for judgment. She thrust the evidence in his face, screaming for judgment. The email was a manifesto of obsession, repeating the same sick phrase over and over. Hours ago, the girls had been blissfully ignorant on the bus. Then the phone buzzed like a warning bell. Minamo saw the notification, and the color drained from her face. The darkness closed in around her. The digital silence broke. The stalker knew she was in the village. He asked about the dead boy. She gagged at the intrusion, feeling phantom eyes crawling on her skin. She forced a smile, lying through her teeth to protect Mai, because she knew the killer wasn't just watching. He was here. She crumbled, convinced Kento's blood stained her hands. Kudo shut that down, insisting she wasn't the villain. But her hands trembled, terrified that Mai already hated her. She recalled her friend's unusual violent rage. She admitted her own selfishness had caused this entire nightmare. Kudo scoffed. He said secrets were necessary for survival. He told her to stop crying and go fix it. He admitted he didn't have the guts to push forward alone. Not with Kudo missing. And the Ningyou tunnel offered no escape, its throat gagged by a mountain of jagged rock. Kazuyoki scoured the cliffside for an exit, but the path ended in a sheer drop into the abyss. No way forward. He forced his trembling legs to turn back toward the village. He froze. A sound cut through the wind. Step. Something was walking the path. Step. Not an animal. Step. It was right on top of him. From the darkness, a charred nightmare emerged. Her skin was a melted ruin of dripping flesh. She reached out, croaking a fragmented name. She lunged, swearing they would be friends forever in hell. Kazuyoki collapsed, shrieking, begging the abomination to spare him. Cold hands grabbed his skull. He braced for death. But the voice was human. It was just the class president, wondering why Kazuyoki looked like he had seen a ghost. Kazuyoki screamed until his lungs burned. The president held him steady, apologizing for the darkness. Then he noticed the boy's sweater was torn to shreds. For a split second, a vision fractured his mind. A blindfolded boy suspended in fire, a ritual to break the curse. Then, reality snapped back. The president laughed off the tension. He was just as lost in these woods. No streetlights, no map. He smiled, genuinely relieved to find a friendly face in the dark. But the president was not alone. A pale, long-haired woman peered out from the tree directly behind him. Kazuyoki saw her, and he could not breathe. Minamo stepped into the sick room, dragging her guilt like a heavy chain behind her. She whispered the confession she had been choking on. Kento was dead, and it was all her fault. She waited for a scream, a slap, anything, but the figure in the bed gave her nothing but cold silence. Her patience snapped. She shrieked, demanding to be heard, and tore the quilt off the sleeping girl. But Mai was not just resting. The darkness had already crawled into bed with her. Black, inky stains bloomed across her uniform, marking a slumber that no apology could ever disturb. 6 months ago, she found her sanctuary. Not a classroom, but a toilet stall. The door groaned shut, sealing her in with the cold stench of the restroom. She unpacked her lunch, preparing to eat in the only place where eyes couldn't judge her. But the walls were paper thin. Laughter erupted outside, sharp and cruel. She froze, chopsticks trembling, terrified the predators would sniff out their prey. It didn't stop at noise. Filthy water crashed down from above, soaking her to the bone. She sat there, dripping and humiliated, while the unseen crowd roared with laughter. She dragged her heavy feet home. Crossing the threshold, she hoped to hide the shame, but mothers always notice. Her mom paused the laundry, eyeing the wet uniform, and asked if a storm had passed through. Mai didn't falter. She forced a painful smile and lied. Just a forgotten umbrella, nothing more. Then came the second blow. Her mother apologized, voice heavy with guilt. They were moving again. Another town, another school. She assumed Mai would miss her friends. The irony was suffocating. Mai didn't have a soul to say goodbye to. Yet she beamed, promising she'd be just fine in the new city. Desperation breeds monsters. In the dark, she knelt before a glowing artifact, chanting a single plea. She wanted friends, and she pressed the seal to get them, no matter the cost. Jonenhai loomed like a gray tomb, a prison for a girl praying for a miracle. The teacher threw her to the wolves immediately, demanding she speak. She stammered, choking on the air while the class dissected her. A voice sneered from the back, wanting eye candy instead of a funeral procession. The teacher roared for silence, but the judgment was already deafening. She forced out her name, bowing low to hide her shame. Imari Mai. The verdict was instant. Social execution. She curled into the darkness of her own mind, begging for the end. But a voice pierced the void. Fujisaki Minamo stood there, a creature of blinding light. She didn't offer pity. She offered a lifeline. Minamo was the golden child, cheerful, popular, untouchable. Standing in her shadow, the cold isolation finally lifted. The predators retreated. No one touches the queen's new pet.
So Amari sculpted herself to fit the mold, buying loyalty with gifts, terrified the darkness would return.
The nightmare descended. Mai crumpled to the floor, and Minamo's scream tore through the silence.
The blonde and the boy scrambled, begging the girl to hold on.
They dragged her limp form toward the sunlight, praying for a miracle. The boy pressed trembling fingers to her wrist, hunting for a pulse. Cold sweat slicked his face. He whispered the grim verdict. She is dead.
Minamo froze.
Her mind shattered, refusing to accept the cold reality. She shrieked, a raw sound of denial, desperate for the corpse to open its eyes. But death was not done with them yet. The boy gripped her shoulder hard. He barked at her, forcing her to snap out of the shock. There was no time for grief. If they stayed to mourn, they would be butchered too. The mountain path wound through a dead world. They marched on, nerves shattered, weapons ready. She stopped cold. The air tasted of rot. Something was fundamentally wrong. Haruya looked up, and the blood drained from his face. It should have been dawn, but the sun refused to rise. He reached out a trembling hand, a clumsy attempt to offer comfort in hell. She saw the fear mirroring her own and gripped his fingers tight. Fingers locked. Two terrified children, clinging to a fragile tether in the dark. He tried to rationalize the madness. He claimed the abomination only hunted students, not the villagers. He swore her parents were safe, a desperate lie to keep her moving. She thanked him, desperate to believe. Ignorance is a mercy. Haruya glanced back for Kazuyoki, but the darkness answered with silence.
They froze. He was breathing down their necks just a second ago.
Cold panic set in. Haruya screamed his name, but the forest just swallowed the sound. A single light flickered in the void. Salvation? She recognized the Konoe estate. They needed help to find him. They didn't hesitate. They sprinted toward the glow, praying the family inside could save them. The old compound loomed ahead. They burst through the gates, screaming for sanctuary. Haruya slammed into the dirt, cursing the obstacle that snagged his foot. He glared at the dark lump, demanding to know who the hell left a rock in the road. But the girl froze. She realized with a jolt of horror, that was not a stone. It was a severed head. The jaw hung loose in a silent scream. Dead eyes stared into nothing, frozen in absolute terror. The headless body lay waiting in the snow. Spotted robes soaked up the cold, abandoned to the wind. Haruya recoiled, his sanity fracturing at the gore. The girl recognized the victim instantly, the head priest. Their safe haven was a slaughterhouse. Death had beaten them to the gate. A jagged silhouette severed their escape route. Under the silent judgment of the moon, Haruya barked at the lurking shape. It was just 4 eyes, but the nerd looked like a walking corpse. Haruya seized him by the collar, demanding answers. The coward refused to meet his gaze, muttering a frantic warning to show respect to the abominations residing here. He stood paralyzed in the gloom, urging them to flee before the true monsters came out to feed. The air near Hitozuma Pass reeked of panic. Someone, or something, was screaming in the dark. But the face, waiting in the shadows, wasn't human. It was a giant, porcelain corpse. Yeah. Osakabe pointed his flashlight deeper into the gloom. There wasn't just one. They were everywhere. Outside, Kazuyoki stared at an effigy tied to a cedar. He knew the lore. If you see the doll, you die. Osakabe reached for a tree trunk, but his fingers sank into cold fabric flesh. He recoiled, demanding to know if the kid was seeing the same nightmare. The terror in Kazuyoki's eyes confirmed it. This was no illusion. Practical to a fault, Osakabe tried to hoist the cursed object onto his back. Beneath the grime and matted hair, the thing's eyes seemed to mock his stupidity. A local stepped out of the shadows and roared. "Stop! Do not carry it!" Osakabe dropped his hands. Fine. He would let the villagers inherit the bad luck. Osakabe demanded the teacher's location. The masked boy spat back. The man had vanished. Osakabe studied the map, ignoring the danger. He pushed them deeper into the gloom, until Kazuyoki signaled the path ahead. The path died at a stone throat, choked with heavy rubble. Osakabe's optimism finally cracked. Takatori had promised to check the road hours ago, but the tunnel was sealed tight. No way out, no rescue coming. Kazuyoki hissed through his mask. That bastard teacher left them here to die. Osakabe played the saint, chirping that he was just glad everyone survived. Kazuyoki stared at that beaming face and felt nothing but pure, cold hatred. The class rep preened like a hero, while the outcast realized they were living in two different worlds. Osakabe turned back, innocently suggesting they ask the locals for help. Kazuyoki panicked. He screamed that the villagers were the monsters. The class rep froze, demanding a reason for the sudden outburst. But the truth sounded insane. The locals were hunting students, and Osakabe was too naive to see the blood on their hands. Guilt clawed at his throat. He was not a victim. He was a butcher, a monster who had slaughtered his own classmates. Osakabe remained blissfully ignorant. He turned his back on the predator, deciding to fetch the others. Then, he made a fatal mistake. He flashed a bright smile and invited the wolf into the sheepfold. He offered clothes, a warm bath, and a seat at their table. He suggested the boy return to his own squad later. Kazuyoki froze. The question hung in the cold air like a noose. He confessed the grim truth. There was no squad, no sanctuary waiting for him in the dark. Osakabe's confidence shattered. He clutched his notebook, admitting he was just as hopeless. He was lost in the woods. The artificial lights had died. The forest road was now a suffocating tunnel of shadows. Osakabe shivered. The prospect of sleeping on the freezing dirt sent a tremor through his bones. Kazuyoki ignored the whining. He needed to confirm his companion's allegiance. He pointed a bandaged hand at the black sky. They would follow the North Star. He traced the route on the paper map, aligning it with the heavens. Osakabe stared in disbelief. He could not comprehend navigating without a guide. He showered the killer with praise, eyes sparkling with naive admiration. He called it a superpower. Kazuyoki stared back, his expression hollow. This boy was too innocent for this blood-soaked world. Stranded without a ride, the two boys were forced to walk the desolate road alone. The only sound was the rhythmic crunch of sneakers on pavement. But the silence felt heavy, suffocating, like something was waiting in the shadows. Paranoia snapped their heads back, the weight of unseen eyes burning their necks. And the darkness answered. A pale, ghostly hand slithered from the trees. Instinct took over. He screamed for them to run, spinning on his heels. The forest blurred into a tunnel of panic as they sprinted, desperate to escape the unseen. But the nightmare was faster. A pale hand lunged out of the void. Terror choked him, his eyes wide with the realization that there was nowhere to hide. Pigtails hissed at them, demanding to know why they stared at her like she was some kind of abomination. Beanie and the mask caught up to her in the darkness, asking if she was just as lost as they were. He scoffed at the accusation, staring down the looming estate and claiming he was hunting for a way out. Inside the rot, technology died. The phone was a useless brick. No signal, no lifeline. He delivered the grim news. The search party had failed. No one was coming to save them. Four Eyes finally snapped, hyperventilating and refusing to spend another second in this tomb. But the room itself confessed its sins. The walls were plastered with the frantic scrawls of the damned. The doll is angry. She's watching. A mural of madness promising that they would all die. Does the memory of a confession haunt you, or does it haunt you? The countdown began exactly 1 week before the isolation of the rural field trip. Yukimi, the cynic, tried to bury herself in fiction, but her tormentor, Miu, demanded she face the horror of reality. They debated the merits of two-dimensional lovers versus flesh and blood, until Miu spotted a target. A breathing anomaly that blurred the line between perfection and reality. Seki Tsubasa, the ace, a creature of pure charisma stalking the corridors. The desperate masses swarmed him, begging to be chosen for his pack. Yukimi sneered from the safety of the sidelines, dismissing the hysteria. But you can never hide from the alpha. He locked eyes with his prey. He cornered her in the lab, issuing a command disguised as an invitation. Sir. He froze. He pointed a finger like a loaded gun. Yes, you. Then panic set in, and before she could flee, Miu threw herself into the trap right beside her. Yukimi turned on her friend, realizing she had been sacrificed for a chance at romance, but the instigator had a weapon in mind. A simple transformation. She imagined a beautiful lie without the glasses, but in the cold light of day, she was just being shoved into the slaughter. Yukimi froze. This wasn't a school trip. It was a prison sentence. Miyu tried to mask the agony, but her legs were already screaming for mercy. The monsters ahead didn't even break a sweat. Karen flaunted her scout training, sneering at their weakness. But even she was prey compared to the alphas. Tatsuya the pitcher, and Seki the lethal striker, followed by the massive judo tank, Uno.
The rest of the herd? An otaku, a rocker, and a doll.
The sun died, and the path vanished beneath their feet.
Meo panicked, the stench of fear rising from their so-called leader.
But Tatsuya smiled, betting his life on a local superstition. They crossed into the forbidden zone, blind and deaf. Yukimi's lungs burned. She was ready to accept death. Instead, she snapped, hauling a useless boy like a sack of meat. Suddenly, the soccer ace launched his assault. Seki didn't see a girl. He saw a training weight. A 9-9. I'm Anakin Siblia. He bolted into the dark, ignoring her shrieks of terror. Uno mimicked madness, snatching 2 more victims. 7. Yukimi stared into the abyss of their stupidity and realized she was trapped with absolute meatheads. Salvation finally appeared out of the gloom, a traditional house promising shelter from the crushing dark. They tried the polite approach, announcing their school like it mattered, but Tatsuya just shoved the door open, ignoring the screech of the wood. Inside, the silence was heavy, thick, a darkness that felt like it was watching back. The herd hesitated on the threshold, their voices dying in their throats.
Then Four Eyes froze, her gaze locked onto something in the shadows, her sanity fracturing in real time.
And there it was, a human pendulum, suspended in the center of the room, a body hung limp, framed by the open doors.
The rope strained against the beam. A rhythmic, wet creaking sound echoed through the hall. The victim swayed, dripping fluids onto the floor, while unseen voices whispered of dolls and illusions, screaming the name, Hinoki.
A scream tore through the room, shattering the silence. Isao checked the hanging legs for a pulse, but found only cold, dead meat. Tatsuya begged them to call the police, spotting a phone in the victim's pocket, but Miyu refused to step into that bloodbath to retrieve it.
A towering, semi-nude monstrosity rose behind Nonomiya. She stepped back, squelching into a puddle of black slime, while Yukimi gagged on the putrid stench.
The wall phone screamed, ringing right next to the abomination. She grabbed the receiver, praying for salvation, but the line was dead. No signal, no escape. Karen warned them the road was a suicide mission in this pitch-black darkness. Soseki sealed their fate. They would sleep here. A decision they would regret the moment they found the diary.
The darkness swallowed them whole. Remaining in the shadows was a death sentence, but the open road promised an even quicker end.
Nonomiya broke the stillness with a grim alternative, the annex. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was suffocating.
They slipped into the unlocked room. The boys puffed their chests and played hero, promising safety, while Natsume fought to keep her trembling hands steady.
Then the lights flickered on to reveal a twisted welcome. The walls were scarred with frantic scrawls. The doll is behind everything. Die. The culprit sat innocently on the bedding. The message scrawled in red was impossible to ignore. It is the doll. Nonomiya didn't even blink. She slapped on a face mask, prioritizing skincare over survival. Yukimi simply collapsed, letting exhaustion drag her into a fitful sleep.
Suddenly, the floor beneath them convulsed. Yukimi scrambled in the quake, blind and helpless without her glasses. Gravity took aim. A heavy diary launched off the shelf and cracked her right in the skull. But as the throbbing pain faded, a morbid curiosity took root. The pages held a confession, a doll that refused to be discarded, returning to its owner like a festering curse.
A chill raced down Yukimi's spine. Was she holding the suicide note of the dead girl? Natsume snapped her out of the trance. Yukimi shoved the cursed book away, lying through chattering teeth that she was fine. Nonomiya ordered lights out. Tomorrow's horror was a problem for tomorrow, but the darkness brought no peace. The diary sat in the gloom, taunting her. It held the secret to the suicide. She knew the knowledge was poison, but she was desperate for a taste.
A voice pierced the silence. Her heart nearly hammered out of her chest, but it was just Natsume, mocking her shattered nerves. Fear has a nasty habit of pressing on the bladder.
Natsume refused to step foot in the cursed annex toilet alone, begging for company.
She chose the dignity of the bushes instead, forcing Yukimi to stand watch in the suffocating dark. While Natsume relieved herself, Yukimi's eyes locked onto the rotting storehouse. The diary's warning echoed in her skull. The doll, it was supposed to be inside, festering in the shadows. A sudden gust of wind battered the shed, dragging the heavy doors apart with a rusty groan.
Yukimi froze as the black gap widened. Cold sweat trickled down her spine, her breath hitching as she waited for something to look back. She braced for an abomination, but saw only swirling dust. The room was empty.
Natsume finished, oblivious to the silent terror, and dragged them back toward the safety of the main house.
Yukimi told herself the doll was a myth, but the storehouse remained behind them, its wooden mouth gaping open, waiting.
Back in the guest room, the silence was heavy enough to crush a lung. Yukimi lay paralyzed, fighting the cold logic in her own head. If there was no doll in the warehouse, there was no curse, right? She told herself the graffiti was random, meaningless, but the gnawing curiosity was stronger than her fear. She couldn't sleep until she knew the truth. She cracked open the diary. The ink looked barely dry, dated just 4 days ago. These were the frantic scribbles of a woman named Hana. Hana wrote of a suffocating pressure, a village that refused to let her breathe. Then came the final entry. The elders had summoned her into the night. The vision hit like a fever dream. 2 bodies crumpled on the floor amidst shattered glass. A crowd gathered, watching like vultures, while Hana stared at the wreckage of her life. The trial was a sham. Men in dark glasses screamed about abduction, claiming these women tried to steal their precious Hina-sama. Hana screamed back, demanding sanity. But logic meant nothing to fanatics. To anger, the doll was death. So the leader gave the order. Sacrifice the sinners to appease the idol. They bowed to the wooden figure, apologizing for the disturbance. They truly believed this thing held back the floods and earthquakes. Hana realized the truth. They would murder her just to keep their luck. The conclusion was simple. They were all insane. Hasakura whispered the only sensible plan. Get the police, now. Hana latched onto the idea like a lifeline. But the panic spiked. The mere mention of the law sent the room into a frenzy. They could not let the outside world in. Night fell, and the trap snapped shut. The elder paced before them, his voice low and lethal. He knew someone had contacted the authorities. The group huddled together, pleading innocence. But the cult didn't care about justice. They needed a ritual. They needed blood. The high-pitched whine of a spinning circular saw answered their prayers. Back in the bedroom, a sudden chill woke her. She wasn't alone. Rotting, severed arms drifted out of the darkness, reaching for her throat. The curse revealed its true face. A shattered woman, a collage of floating limbs and malice, hovered over the bed, hungry to add Yukimi to her collection. Let's tally the dead. Nyami found the bodies, so the villagers tore him apart. The chief priest is gone, and the parents have vanished into thin air. The rest are scattered like rats in a maze. 6 groups, all scrambling toward the tunnel. But does a way out even exist? Could you butcher a body to save your village? The ritual demanded a severed head. The command was absolute. 6 families, 6 dolls, 1 corpse to feed them all. Hana recoiled. Why was she the chosen butcher? The 5th family offered no escape. She took the wet sack, gagging at the weight. She considered dumping it, but the elders had eyes everywhere. If she returned empty-handed, they would carve her up instead. She adjusted her grip, fighting the nausea. A dead eye peered through the fabric. She screamed as the bundle slipped. Distortibos the Highland. It hit the dirt with a sickening, wet thud. Hana scrambled down the rocks, chasing the rolling head. She snatched the knot before it vanished into the dark. Fial. Sobbing, she realized she could not take it anymore. Nearby, a blonde stranger drowned her fear in sake. She dragged a broken woman into the rotting shed. Sonchas into Sixer Trotting in, the victim lay paralyzed, cursed talismans sealing her chest.
Blood ticked away the seconds. Captor loomed over her, waiting for the end. The vessel lay open, a hollow, stained cavity where the curse should have been. Cold sweat slicked her skin, the silence stretching, suffocating. Hana scrambled back, sending a bottle crashing onto the tatami. She couldn't face the terror sober. She had to drown the fear. Paranoia rippled through her mind, sloshing like the sake in her trembling cup. She swallowed a pill, begging for the tremors to cease. But the room wasn't empty. A shadow watched from the dark alcove. Aoki. A single, hateful eye bored into her through the gloom. She collapsed, mind reeling. She had locked that thing inside the doll. She would have to perform the ritual all over again. Morning found her unconscious among the wreckage of empty bottles.
Her head throbbed, blurring the line between hangover and nightmare.
Was it just the liquor? She swore she had hidden it away, because severed heads don't just grow legs and walk away. The question festered in her mind like rot. Had they truly managed to hide the severed flesh? She needed an ally who hadn't lost their mind. Kiyama pressed the buzzer, the sound piercing the silence. The door slid open with a dry rattle. Shiga welcomed her into the gloom, muttering about the burden of her age. The room reeked of stale air and obsession. Shiga sat on the tatami, surrounded by a butcher's yard of dismembered doll arms. She gathered the porcelain limbs like bleached bones, a grotesque collection of spare parts. Kiyama froze, but Shiga just smiled, claiming the dolls soiled their hands too easily and required constant replacements. Then, she revealed the dark tradition. The family always harvests the left hand, a rule even Asako understood.
The words tore open a violent memory, a scream from the past, warning her never to approach the storehouse.
Yoiko had no time for pleasantries. She backed her father into a corner, demanding to know why he kept those wretched things locked inside the storehouse. Her voice cracked into a scream as she begged for the truth, but the only answer was a suffocating silence. Soar. Then came the interruption. Hana stepped right into the crossfire, her presence slicing through the heavy air like a dull blade. Out on the street, Yoko wasted no time. She knew Hana had heard that scream. She rattled off the symptoms of the rot infecting their lives. Her father's paranoia, her mother locked away in the dark, stitching together replacement limbs. Hana froze. The color drained from her face, and a bead of cold sweat traced a line down her temple. Echo leaned in close, trapping her with a glare. She knew the truth. Hana was hiding one of those flesh-eating abominations too. Hana tried to drown her lies in cheap sake, insisting she knew nothing, but the silence in the room was suffocating. By the time the old monk arrived, she was surrounded by empty bottles. He looked down at her, disgusted that she was already drunk in the middle of the afternoon. He didn't hold back his disdain. He spat that her family's misery wasn't bad luck, but punishment for treating the dolls like garbage. She snapped, screaming her parents died in an accident, not because of some curse. She swore she had already paid her dues. The monk cut through her denial with a cold command. She had to call Jonan High School immediately and cancel the field trip scheduled for 3 days from now. He shoved the contact slip into her hand while she played dumb, but he made it clear. If those kids messed with the dolls, they wouldn't just find porcelain, they would find the body parts. Cold sweat broke across her forehead. The secret was out, and it was threatening to spill blood. He left the dirty work in her hands. His parting gift was a suggestion to chant a sutra to calm her nerves. She watched him leave, abandoned with the rot in her house.
The monk's performance reeked of deceit. Driven by suspicion, she seized the phone, determined to tear down his facade. The line connected to the high school. Feigning a local accent, she claimed to be calling from the village, demanding to speak with Takatori. But the voice on the other end delivered a chilling blow. The receptionist had never heard of a teacher named Takatori. The man didn't exist. Anna stared up at the rotting wood of Kogami Hall. It loomed over her like a tomb. Her mind raced back to the monk's warning. There was no Takatori at the school. Had that bald liar sent her on a fool's errand? That woman wasn't a teacher. She was a fraud, and this hall was her nest. Hana spotted a guidebook inside. It was the key to the nightmare. Touching the belongings of the dead made her skin crawl.
but she couldn't let those children walk into the trap. She jammed the key into the lock and twisted. The metal groaned. The air inside was heavy. Black heels sat by the door, a blazer waiting on the hook. Makeup scattered across the table. The realization hit her. That woman was alive in this room just yesterday. She had to stop them. She tore through the room, desperate to find a contact.
There. The pamphlet. The number stared back at her.
Dread coiled in her gut, but she dialed anyway, begging them to cancel the trip. The receptionist's answer turned her blood to ice. "We don't have a rural experience program." She cut the line. The silence in the kitchen pressed against her ears. Then, a sudden chill. Was that a reflection in the glass? She looked down. Muddy footprints and a discarded slipper. Her hands trembling, she slid the partition open to face the intruder. Hana sat on the edge of the porch, drowning the heavy silence with bitter sake. Inside, 2 fresh portraits stared back. Mother, father, both dead. Outside, the village vultures whispered that the girl was finally defenseless.
The wake was less a funeral and more a sermon on obedience.
They claimed her father died for disrespecting Lady Hina. The suits grinned, calling the insurance payout a divine kindness. Hina just sat there, a stone-faced idol, soaking up the madness. But the real nightmare wore a suit and tie. The elder cornered her in the courtyard, barking orders. He crushed her dreams of the city, spitting that she belonged to Lady Hina now. Then came the dagger. He leaned in, glasses glinting.
You don't want to end up like your parents, do you?
Back in her prison, Hana realized the cold truth. Staying in this village meant death. She remembered the city boy who mocked her primitive life. No radio? No hope. She had to run. Abandon the village. Abandon the doll. Hana stared at her wooden jailer, making a lethal choice. Throw out the doll, start a new life. But exhaustion is a heavy blanket. She drifted off, leaving her guard completely down, until the house spoke, a dry, wooden creak. One eye opened, alert. A silhouette stained the paper door. Something was waiting outside. You know,
it slithered in. A pale foot, a searching hand, whispering, "Not here." Then reality fractured. A headless suit erupted from the floor, vomiting black smoke and demanding her skull.
Hana woke up screaming. Silence. Just the empty tatami mats. Her heart slowed. A nightmare, nothing more.
Wrong. A heavy weight pinned her down. Hair like wet seaweed draped over her neck.
It was the doll, its dead eyes inches from hers. Hana scrambled back, choking on a scream. It stood there, defying nature. 9017, 509017, and 22. That thing was locked in the shed. That sicky lad. Inaxiviu. Now Pimpers on. Did it break out? Or had Hana's sanity finally snapped? While the others succumbed to sleep, the scholar continued to scour the cursed pages. Cold sweat slicked her neck. If the diary was true, a second corpse was already rotting within these walls. Her eyes darted to the sliding door, where the writing seemed to stare right back.